I'm going to show you how I turn the photograph on the left into the loose watercolour painting on the right. Let's get started. Painting wet on dry, just with that buff titanium. Again, you can use a very, very dilute raw sienna. It's just to get things started. So I haven't actually got any drawing there, if you notice. I want to paint freely. And sometimes when you're working from a photograph, this is a really good way of sort of responding to the photograph without copying it, because you haven't got an outline drawing and you can paint freely. So I've just added that sort of lilac colour, wet into wet, and letting the sort of paint drizzle down to the right hand side. Large area, large brush. Small area, large brush as well, but obviously you can go to a small brush. But it's quite nice to use a large brush for a large area. It really does loosen you up. I'm kind of working with thirds, so it's about a third for the sky. And I've decided not to paint all of those sort of misty, distant mountains. I'm just going to paint mostly sky here. And there we are. I'm sort of making decisions about the photograph, using my own ideas and creating from the photograph, not copying. So mixing up some more ultramarine here. And I'm painting this in wet into wet now with my size 10 round brush. And I just want to kind of vary the colours in the sky. That colour does have sort of a little bit of the pink and the buff titanium, but it's mostly ultramarine. So adding a little bit more of that ultramarine now with a pinch of burnt umber, just to grey it down a little bit, darken it up a bit. I don't want to change it from being a blue though. I just want it to be a stronger blue. And that's wet into wet. Going in now and mixing up that Cascade green with the ultramarine. So it's a blue green. So if you don't have the Cascade, don't worry. You could use Hooker's green, or you could use a pinch of yellow, but mostly blue. And this is wet into wet. I was trying to paint the nearest misty mountain, but it started to look like sky. So I'm just going to go with the flow, using a damp brush here just to soften that edge there, because I'm going into dry paper there. And I'm just painting a little bit of the Cascade green with the ultramarine, about 50-50 now. And that is sort of more damp into damp there, going into the dry paper just beneath it, because I haven't wet the whole of the paper. I've added a little bit more ultramarine there just below, and going back to the bigger brush now and just softening that with a clean sort of wet brush. I've decided to mix up a sort of mid-green using a quinacridone gold with a little bit of that Cascade green. You could use quinacridone gold with ultramarine. I'm using a kebab stick here, dipping it into that puddle of paint, and I just wanted to draw in either that road or stream or whatever it is that's leading the eye into the painting. And this is on dry paper, just drawing in the foreground there as well. So it's kind of like thirds, a third of the sky, a third of that middle ground going into the sort of background area. And I'm sort of dividing it up a little bit, but keeping it really, really simple. Loading that brush with the quinacridone gold and the Cascade green. Again, you could use ultramarine and quinacridone gold, or even ultramarine and yellow, whatever you have. Just vary your greens. A little bit more of that Cascade green, pushing it into the wet paint using a large brush. Remember, large brush, large area. So using a little bit more of the ultramarine here with the Cascade green, painting wet on dry, and just coming down to that foreground area, wet on dry. So just working my way across there on the horizon area using the tip of that large brush. Now, if you find a large brush too big, do swap to a brush that you feel comfortable with, which I have done here. I'm using a size 8, and I'm actually just dropping water along that sort of edge there to hopefully create some cauliflowers and texture and detail. And I'm just actually using the brush to outline the right hand side of that pathway or river. So I'm now mixing up Cascade green and quinacridone gold with a bit of yellow as well there in the middle, and a little bit of phthalo blue now with some burnt umber to make a really dark green. So I've got a mid green, a lighter green and a dark green. I'm painting this with my size 8 brush. Just added a little bit more ultramarine here with the burnt umber, slightly darker. Oh, that is lovely and dark. Look at that. It's wet into wet, and it's just to divide up the fields. Now, I have got the photograph in front of me, but I'm kind of giving an impression, and this is almost like an underpainting. I'm dividing up the fields, etc. And when you copy or use a photograph, you have to be careful not to use exactly the same colours on the photograph that are in your painting, because it can make your photograph look flat. So use the artistic tool of using cooler colours that recede and warmer colours that come forward, and that will create depth in your painting. If you copy the photograph colours, you tend to use the same sort of colours in the background as in the middle ground and foreground, and that's where your painting can look flat. So use those tools, those warm and cool colours, and I'll put a link in the description below of a tutorial I published all about warm and cool colours and how it can help you, especially creating depth in your painting. I'm actually painting damp into damp with a very creamy dark colour, and that's the sort of trees and bushes. Now the ones that are furthest away, they look sort of fuzzy and misty, or I want to create that effect to create depth and atmosphere as well. So use size and edges we can use in watercolour, because you get those hard edges and soft edges and fuzzy edges. So here, because I'm using damp into damp, the paint doesn't spread too far, so they stay, but they look further away because they've got soft edges. And you want to create darker, stronger, warmer colours coming into the foreground, and that will create depth. So I'm working on the right hand side now. I'm using some yellow. You could mix a little bit of phthalo blue with that, like lovely spring green colour. I'm just trying to create a variety of greens for this painting. Again, not necessarily copying the photograph. I'm creating from the photograph and using kind of my ideas and varying the colours so it doesn't look flat and it looks interesting. I will put a link in the description below of a tutorial I published a while ago about mixing greens, and you might find that helpful for mixing a variety of greens. I like to use 2 blues, maybe 3 blues even, a grey, a green, and 2 or 3 yellows as well, so you get a lovely variety of greens, and I will put those in the description below. But as you can see here, I'm working my way down and mixing colours sort of as I go as well. I love using a little bit of the Quin Gold. I've had some phthalo blue here with the burnt umber. You can use burnt sienna as an alternative, but mixing phthalo blue or Prussian blue with any brown, especially burnt sienna or burnt umber, you get some beautiful dark greens. So just working my way down here, wet on dry, and then dropping in those darker colours and details, damp into damp. So this is a lovely sort of dark colour coming into the sort of just above the foreground, and just using my size 10 round brush. I'm mixing up here ultramarine with Paynes grey, and I'm just painting using my size 4 round brush, really tiny trees on the horizon. Remember, small sizes will look much further away. And this is damp into damp, so it will give you soft edges which will look further away. So I'm using a small brush because it gives me control. If you find it's bleeding too much because my sky area is still damp, what I would suggest is taking off the excess paint off on your paper towel. So here is a close-up, and you just want to vary them. And I would even practice this beforehand. It might give you a little bit more courage, especially when you're painting in that area there, which is the sky or those distant hills. I can't decide which. So I'm just adding a little bit of buff titanium just to soften those. Again, I love this colour because it really does neutralise and soften colours, any colour. So just adding a little bit of tiny trees there just on the left hand side, so they look even further away. So I'm mixing up a little bit of the phthalo blue, Paynes grey and burnt umber. I'm painting these sort of larger trees now, damp into damp. So they still have soft edges, so they kind of recede back a little bit, and I'm varying the sizes. You can see in the photograph there is this sort of grouping of trees, so I thought I would paint those. I was quite inspired by them. and sort of painting sort of medium, small and large trees. Just adding a slightly thicker colour now. This is the phthalo blue, and just painting that just at the bottom of the trees, damp into damp. If your painting is drying too quickly, just give it a little spritz with your spritzer bottle. Don't overdo it because you don't want to wet the paint too much and have it all running. It just sort of introduces a little bit of moisture and allows you to carry on working damp into damp. So as you can see here, I'm just working my way down here, still using the size 4 brush, painting damp into damp, varying the heights of those bushes and trees, and also varying the colours. So I could use some phthalo blue and burnt umber, ultramarine and quinacridone gold, or even use some of that Cascade green with a little bit of the burnt sienna, burnt umber, or quinacridone gold. So you can really sort of get into the colour mixing here and vary them. If your colours all look the same, you might need to change your water and make sure you rinse your brush all the time, and maybe even clean your palette up and start afresh. And always start off with a main colour, and that could be the phthalo blue, and add a pinch of another colour, not loads, because that will just kind of lose all the phthalo blue and you'll end up with same colours. So really kind of treat it almost scientifically and add those colours sort of really with a small brush and just a little bit at a time, and you'll have a lot more control. So I'm just adding some bigger trees here, damp into damp in the foreground, still using the size 4 brush, one of my favourite brushes. It is wearing out, so I might have to buy another one. So as you can see here, I've got some fir trees and conifer trees, etc., and some bushes. And again, just varying the sizes. I have made these a little bit darker, so they'll come forward a little bit more. So as you can see, just working my way along there, damp into damp. So I'm going to start working on the foreground, which is going to be the bottom third. So mixing up some of the cadmium yellow to make a yellow green. It has a little bit of that green underneath. And then adding some quinacridone gold to that Cascade green. You can use ultramarine. And now using some of that green that I've got there, and I'm going to add some burnt sienna. I really want to get some variety here. So here's my burnt sienna, and I'm going to add some phthalo blue. So I've got sort of lovely light, medium and dark green. Loaded my brush as you saw there, working wet on dry on the left hand side of the foreground. Now working on the right hand side and using that sort of mid and dark green. My goodness, these larger brushes are very thirsty. Note to self, mix more paint. So just sort of varying the colours, adding a little bit more of a blue green there and dark green as I come into the foreground. Mixed up some more phthalo blue with some burnt sienna. I'm painting damp into damp here and there in the foreground. A little bit on the edge there, really dark, damp into damp with my size 8 round brush. So you can see I've got some lovely contrast of light and dark greens, which really bring that foreground forward to create depth. I'm just softening some of the edges here with a clean damp brush so it doesn't look like a cutout and it looks more natural. I'm just working my way here in the foreground, just adding some darker bushes using the phthalo blue and burnt umber or burnt sienna, and you can add some Paynes grey to make it even darker. So just varying the shapes and the sizes using my size 4 brush. So be brave. This is damp into damp, and I'm using the brush then really putting on those trees here in the foreground, the top area. So to create some depth in my painting, I'm lifting off using a plastic card to create light areas and to create the look of grasses and sort of tree trunks or branches, etc., and just details and texture which will bring that foreground forward and make the background look further away, and it just is a magical way of creating depth. So I'm not really looking at the photograph now. I'm just adding some salt again to create depth. So what that'll do will absorb that damp paint and create light textures once dry. So just adding a very dilute cerulean to the path. Again, I'm not deciding whether it's a path or water. You can decide. I think I used the blue just in case I decided I wanted it to look like water. So just adding some very sort of dark paint, damp into damp on the edge of the path or water, the river there, just to create the sort of land and water divide, and just adding some bushes just along the edges using the size 4 brush, damp into damp. And it kind of tells a story and leads your eye through. Just creating some smaller marks as I go off in the distance. And that's what I want people to do when they look at my painting. I want them to take a journey into that landscape. And that's what that path or the river is taking us through, that sort of windy sort of shape into the sort of background. And just adding darker grasses here and there. Really sort of developing this area here to lead the eye through the painting, and just sort of adding a few more darks just here and there using the size 4 brush. I haven't actually dried my painting yet, and just adding a few more sort of marks just here and there either side of that path there, using sort of paler, smaller marks. And in some areas it's literally wet on dry. Just adding a few finishing touches just here and there, removing the washi tape to have a look to see if I need to do any more to the painting. But I think I'll leave it there for now. It's kind of a really sort of quick, spontaneous painting, sort of using that photograph as a source of inspiration, a reference to create this watercolour painting. You know, painting those trees in the different fields, but also simplifying the painting and not copying everything I see in front of me. If you would like to support the content that I create here on YouTube, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? You will get access to my exclusive tutorials, extended in-depth tutorials, and in some cases downloadable outline sketches. Details about the membership can be found in the description below. Just click the word Patreon. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. Happy painting. Bye for now.